Welcome to the Fire Mountain Gems and Beads jewelry making studio. One of the favorite ways I have of working with metal involves working with wire. Some other fun ways to create spirals aren't just on a two-dimensional plane. We might make things like cage beads. Now, cage bead implies that there's something inside of it. There can be something inside of it, but it doesn't have to be something inside of it. But the way I make a cage bead is to take the wire, and for this I might take about 8 or 9 inches, so it's always handy to have a ruler nearby. And you can see I'm even just using my fingers at this point because it's not too kinked up. And we will take our flush cut pliers, and that's about 9 inches. I went ahead and measured the mat before we got started here today. And I'm checking that I have a clean edge on both sides, knowing that when I do a flush cut, it will be flat on one side and not on the other. So what I do for that is I kind of find the middle by bending, but I don't want to fold it too sharply. I just want to see where each spiral needs to end up. Now, I don't necessarily pay attention that closely to what direction I'm rolling the spiral because we can adjust that towards the end. So let's move that out of the way. So I'm starting an open-ended spiral. I usually don't close these. You can, and they can make neat embellishments that you put inside resin or into clay. But for this purpose, I want to leave that open because I'm probably threading another wire through it, because if I put a bead on it, or even if I use these as empty cages, I need to have a hole to thread whatever suspension method I'm going to use, or even if it's just pulling it upwards and attaching it by a jump ring. So we're going to rotate and get this started. And I'm going to switch over to my flat nose, or even better yet, these nylon jaw pliers. And I'm going to roll almost all the way up to the other edge. So bear with me. It may not be as fun to watch as it is to do, but I assure you, if you aren't doing spirals, oh, this is good. Okay, sometimes you rush it a little too fast like I did, and that's where you get a space you don't want. You can easily just go back and adjust that. There's nothing like taking your time, and I'm not talking about a big difference in time, but because I know you're not having as much fun watching me as I am having fun doing it, unless you're following along. I hope you are. If not, play it back and play with me. Okay, so we're going to bring that one up almost to the end. Okay, and then we're going to start on the second side. Back to our round nose pliers. Try to form the same size loop for some continuity. And let's see if I can get these nylon jaw pliers to start it. Sometimes it's hard to start it with the nylon jaw pliers right after your first rotation, but if you can, you're going to have less issues with marking the wire. You can even twist wire together, 2 different colors or the same color, to get a really unique effect. There's really so many different ways you can take these basic concepts and just modify them to make them even that much more special. So as you can see, this spiral's not going in the right direction. Let's take a look without my hands in the way. Not going in the right direction, but also kind of a fun design motif. I'm not too concerned about that because all I'm going to do, and you might have already been one step ahead of me, is flip it over. And I'm going to roll it in to the edge and roll this one up almost until they meet. And I can even just kind of flatten out. I don't need to straighten that too much, but I want them pretty parallel to one another. Now, you can look at the kind of bead you want, and it can be a round bead or an oblong bead, but it doesn't even just have to be one bead. I have some earrings here where when I made the cage bead, where I put a pearl topped and bottomed with a small crystal bicone, and then put a dangle on the end. So it doesn't just have to be one bead. Sometimes you might find you've got a little extra space at the top and bottom, and that's okay. The bead isn't going to fall out, but you might want to fill it with maybe a smaller component. So the way I get these started is I'm just going to give this a little help. And I use a ballpoint pen just to start pushing out the ends just a little bit. Let's see if I can do it upside down. There, that's better. And you might not like how the wire separates. You're going to have to adjust that a little bit. But the idea is just to get 2 cones started. And I'll use my fingernails, or you can use a needle tool or a toothpick to just kind of push these out, because I do have to do some adjusting as I go to get the kind of spacing I'm looking for. Because it's not always that uniform in my caged beads, I use that to my advantage. I want them to look asymmetrical. Just be sure to say, I meant to do it that way. But let's go ahead and take a bead here and push this down, and I'm going to fold this up and over the top. So it's a little hard to see. So when you do teeny tiny ones, it can be a bit fiddly. But I'm starting to use the bead here to help shape my cage. So I'm going to continue working with that when I do my cage beads, and whatever tool gets you in there, whether I said like it's a needle tool, it could be the tip of your pliers, you just don't want to scratch a crystal or your bead, but you can use your fingernails if you don't mind sacrificing the manicure. And what artist expects to have a beautiful manicure? Okay, so you get the idea. And I don't think you need to see me continue to do this until I get it just the way I want it. But the other thing that I want to do is I will take a tool to align the hole. Sometimes you can actually start putting a head pin or a spiral right through the bead just when you put it in place. And then when you start shaping the cage around it, you can just continue to drive your head pin or whatever way you're suspending it through there. But it's usually not too terribly hard to find one hole. Once you spin it and get the hole aligned, it's usually you can direct it up to the hole you want your other end of your pin to come out of. A little bit of a challenge, and I mean really just a very little bit. And I like doing these. They're just a lot of fun, and they can be used to be strung together, or they can be used as just a little accent or a charm. So the other thing I'd like to share with you is how to make a bead cap with your spirals. Just yet another fun way to work with your spirals. So for something like that, we will get more wire. And if it's not too kinked, you can use your fingers. And I'm usually going to take about 10 inches or so of the wire. It depends on the bead and how many rotations I want around the cap. While you're working, always keep a notebook at your side, because if you want to duplicate it, even if you're just guessing, mark down what you wrote, because if you're happy with the results, you can always add a little note about how much wire you need to get an effect with, say, a 10mm round bead. And then you always have that reference tool, and you don't have to worry about any guesswork down the road. So a lot of my pieces start off a bit more organically, but I always take notes on them so that I can duplicate the results. All right. So we're going to start with a loop with our round nose pliers and probably give ourselves a good 3 inches or so as a tail. So I'm going to bend this backwards at 90 degrees. And you can use another pair of pliers, or the wire's soft enough. This is dead soft wire. I'm going to wrap this around, and you can see I can't complete my loop, but I'm just going to turn this 90 degrees and pull this up so I have an L and a loop at the end of it. I'm going to thread my bead on top, and I am going to take my round nose pliers, and this is just basically doing a coil wrap. If you're not familiar with it, this is a great skill set to introduce to your jewelry making. So I usually like to be close to the tip of whatever round nose pliers I'm using, because I don't want to wrap more than 2 or 3 times on the neck of the wire that goes through my bead. So I'm not worried about which direction it's facing now, because I may need to adjust it depending on how I want to suspend it. So I'm just going to bend it back again and make another 90-degree bend. And I'm going to go a little farther down my pliers to make a bigger loop. And I'm going to fold it over and rotate a quarter of a turn and just pull that wire up nice and tight. So I have 2 loops with a little bit of play on either end. So I'm going to adjust this loop. It's not quite as round as I'd like. So that's when it would be good to bring in some of your flat nose or chain nose pliers and give it a little extra pull on there to get the shape I want. And I'm just going to, either with my hand or with pliers, work on the end, wrap around that neck. I don't want to do it too many times because I want to leave room on the other side. So I've gone 1 full rotation, I've gone 2 full rotations, and I'm going to stop right there. So I still have some play on the other side. I'm going to flip this over and repeat that process. And this wire is a little shorter, so I'm going to find it easier. And I don't try to keep wrapping it around, because you're going to wrap your pliers around your plier. You're going to wrap the wire around your pliers and not have enough to spiral down there. So don't be afraid to do a half a turn, release, and just work with this little tail that's going to be cut off. Another tip is, as you do, even just for a normal coil wrap, to get your coils nice and tight, what you want to do is kind of pull up back towards the eye you formed, that circle, so that they don't have separation between the two. So at this point here, normally I would cut it off and trim it if I just wanted a normal coil wrap, but we want to do a coil cap. And if the other wire's in your way, just move it out of the way. You can bend the wire back and forth quite a bit without work hardening it. And sometimes at this point where you see I'm using my round nose pliers to support it, it can kind of be in the way, so I have a little bit more control with my flat nose or some chain nose pliers. I'm just going to switch out for the chain nose since they have a narrower tip. And I'm just going to work holding it from the end and bring it down. Now it's at the top of the bead. And again, you want your investment to go far. So I don't cut more wire than I think I'm going to need, because I don't want to cut it off and waste it. So again, making notes of your work is really helpful to make sure that you get more projects out of every spool of wire. Now I'm going to, if I wanted to cap more of the bead, I would have needed to have a longer length, but this one's more subtle. So it looks like I've got about 3 rotations, and it looks like I wrapped so hard I pulled it underneath. Now you can do that if you want a more organic, rustic look, but we're just going to pull that out and correct it, and just be a little bit more careful. Sometimes I just implement with my hands and just do that last little bit of curve. Now I'm going to come in there where you can see I don't have much wire left, and that little bit's a bit wonky, and I'm going to take my flush cutters, and I like these really tiny detailed ones, and I'm going to get in there and get a nice flush cut, and then I would go back to the other side and just repeat what I've done. And you may have to take one of your tools and just kind of press it down and get that wire to conform. But you don't only have to do that, you can spiral around. It doesn't have to be a round bead. You can see that this is a bit of a pancake bead. You can spiral around, but have enough wire so that you finish it off on the opposite end, making a spiral. The reason I was able to make that spiral with the closed end in it is I had to judge how many inches I wanted, and probably about 1.5 inches, 2 inches. I made that loop, compressed it to the sides to themselves, and trimmed it, and then I went in and looped it off. So it's a bit of guesswork, but again, I would measure that beforehand with my ruler and see if it worked. If it didn't work, I'd probably cut it off and start with a longer piece of wire. And then I would know for the next time how to do that. So I hope that gets you excited about working with spirals in your work, if you're not already doing it. And if you are already making spirals, I hope you've learned a few tips and tricks that will take your spiral accents to a whole new level.